Footscray, my mother was from Bendigo, but lived in Footscray for the rest of the time, so all their married life. During my span of life, 5 moves I've had, and every one of them's been in Footscray, within a kilometre of the football ground.
Fantastic.
We had some stories we could tell about football and the use of it, and pulling palings off and getting in on match days and whatnot as kids, but it's best not said, I guess. Well, the grade 8 teacher was a very friendly sort of a fellow, not only from the teaching aspect, but looking after our future and suggesting this and that. And truly, what was intended to be after I left school, it was I didn't think much about it, but he convinced me, irrespective of what I want to do at this stage, you've got to get further schooling to go to school, and then during that time you'll be able to make your choice much easier as to what you want to be in your future life. It was rather frightening, not knowing what to expect. I mean, when you go to leave primary school, you're in one class each year, one teacher, and of course going into a new building and not knowing a thing what was ahead of you other than the school you had to go to. It was all frightening, really, until you get involved, and it takes a while to settle down. No, we never ever had any girls, and it was always a boys' class also at the primary school, at the grade 8. Generally, at the whole routine, we did a bit of, besides the actual classes, the chemistry, the tinsmith, the clay modelling, and it was a bit of everything, drawing, and it was a full curriculum of different subjects right through. I enjoyed drawing with the solid geometry and freehand. I've always been able to use my hands at drawing and whatnot, and won a few competitions at the early age of in primary school. Won the first competition. The first prize was a flight over Essendon Aerodrome in Kingsford Smith's old aeroplane in 1928. So, that's getting back a long while, in early days of flying. Well, I was very nervous, and 14 years of age, well, when you leave the school, you're in grade 8, and you know your way around, and the big kids at the small school, and you seem to have the self-authority. When you go there, you're just starting off on something that don't know what's going to happen, and everybody seemed to be mellowed and very calm, and sort of thing, wondering, well, how to go about things, and consequently, the complete change in the system, that you might have 4, 5 different teachers in the one day. You're moving from room to room according to the subject that go on, and even to the extent we used to go classrooms in Nicholson Street back across the road and about 3 stories high, up wooden stairs, and up there with rooms that we used then. So, but it was all exciting, really, but it took a while. It was so different. The adjustment took some time. Oh, they were all good teachers. They knew their job very well, but different tempos of teachers. Some wouldn't be. I wouldn't want to relate what we thought of them at all, but they were bullying to some extent. But then again, they had to deal with, I suppose, a lot of upstarts coming through, and no. But I could always remember Mr. Nichols. He was in the tinsmith room. He was very docile and very understanding, very patient too, I might add. The headmaster, Frank Driver, He was pretty, didn't use a strap, he used a wooden stick on the back of your legs. I suffered that one day. That's another story. We played up, but I'll tell you, because a group of us, we got friendly enough in the first 6 months or so, and they used to have religious instruction one day a week, where a local minister would come in, and all the classes would assemble in the big room in the old part of the building. And a few of us didn't take it very seriously, and we'd always get up the back, and this was the days when they had the seating in long forms with ink wells, and the ink, and we would have little balls of blotting paper and soak it in that, and with a rule sit at the back and flick it from behind. And of course the kids got hit with it and didn't know where it come from or who did it. What we didn't know, the new building, the south wing, along Nicholson Street, that was in the process of building, and outside they had stairs that went from ground level up to the top story, and they had a landing at the second story. And outside, standing on the landing was Frank Tribo, the headmaster, and he's looking straight into big windows along the side and saw everything that was going on. And, with that, he came down and he apologised to the minister to taking the class, and came and walked down to the back of the class. You, outside. So when we got outside, he took us to the office. He laid the law down, and we all wore short trousers in those days, and he hit us on the back of the leg with a stick that was about an inch or so wide, and it hurt. I might add, we never ever did that again. It was very difficult from the fact that we were when we moved out here in the war with World War II, we were declared an industrial, what's the term?
Exempt.
Exempt there. And we then turned into shift work. And we worked 6 days a week on a 3-shift fortnight about each shift. And consequently, here I am doing 4 nights a week the first couple of years on night school, fitting it in with daytime, day shift, that was all right. Afternoon shift, I'd have to get time off from work to go, which of course was no problem. And then on night shift, you'd rush from school to start work at 11 o'clock at night. So it was fully a full-time occupation, really, your schooling and your shift work. It started in 1909.
Right.
Well, of course, and I started there when I was 10 and went right through. 75 years I was with the group before I suffered my loss of eyesight. Well, and of course I couldn't carry on after that. But no, I knew more about the school in the early days than what I did before I started there as a student, because we used to pass the building every time we went round to our scout hall, and of course the principal of the Footscray Tech was Arch Hoadley, who was a scout leader within our group. In fact, the first Footscray Scout group and the Footscray Tech have a lot in common in the early history because of their association with Arch Hoadley. No, I wasn't scared. I was convinced in my own mind it was too far away to affect us, but I've been involved in scouting and as a boy and then as a leader, and was responsible for boys at that age because of our leaders having gone to war. And with that, I did with first aid and advanced first aid, worked as a air raid warden in the purely and simply in first aid. So, you know, the tin hat and the sleeve banner and a little certificate to give you the authorisation, on a blackout to walk around, and any light to be seen had to be closed up and blah, blah, with a team, but as a junior member. So I had a great experience with the learning, never have I had to put it into practice, fortunately. Well, class of 38 is a development of the members, sporting members of that year, in which we were premiers in the football team, the cricket team and the baseball team, all premiers in the 1 year, which was unique, not heard of in the cycle of school, tech schools. So with that, we were hailed very well as far as the school, a lot of prestige. We had a great sports master, Fred Reed was his name, and it was after 50 years that three of the boys that were members of that group, of the sporting group, decided it'd be nice to have a reunion. So they worked for 12 months, going right through all the photographs of these three teams of that year, come up with about 60 names, and over the 12 months they made contact with 47 of them. Oh. And we then decided, right, we've got the names and addresses out of 47 out of about 60, which was a good effort. So we then had a first reunion, which we had 36 present, the following on that 50th year, and we met then in the new school that had just been developed down in Kinnear Street, which was part of the technical or the university groupings. So, and with that, we've met every year since that 50th, and we're now into our 74th year, 76th year, sorry, where we're meeting on the 24th of next month. So, and we've made more friends with over the years by this reunion as whatever we did while we were in school. So, and of course, we can always skite to the fact that with the football team, we've had 5 members that played league football of that team. Bill Hutchinson, who was well known with his experience in playing with Essendon, a winner of 2 Brownlow medals, best and fairest for Essendon for 7 years, captain of the group, and played interstate games, and named in their year the team of the year.
Century.
Of the century, you're right. Bill Williams from South Melbourne, he was also one of the members of that team, played many, over 150 games with, this is when South Melbourne were operation, not well, they were in Sydney. And he was also a member of the team of the century with them. So, you know, and on the cricket team, we had 2 interstate players, Jack Waters from North Melbourne and Colin Milne from South Melbourne, played with Lindsay Hassett. So, you know, and there could have been others that excelled, but we never ever made able to make track of them after they left. But we meet annually, and of course the story gets different every year of how good they were and sort of thing. But their great friendship has been developed over those years after a 50-year spell than whatever was made at the school during the 1 year. At that stage, my parents were considering what would be best for me. Well, truthfully, my marks on the second year were not convincing enough to go any further in relation to that type of future, and that trade would be probably the best thing for me. So it was with then that I was able, when I left the school, through an old school teacher which from the Geelong Road, saw me one day in the recess and asked me what I was doing, and his brother-in-law was a chief engineer of an engineering place out at Carlton, and said, were you looking for a job? I said, yeah, I would be, and sort of thing. So he said, gave me an address. He said, sit tight and I'll see what I can do for you. So the very next day I got a ring from this place to go in for an interview. And then the day after that, they called me to work. So I started there, and it was Paulson Motor Parts in that stage in Berkeley Street in Carlton. But I wasn't too anxious to go there on a push bike every day, but he reassured me they're moving out, building up at Maidstone. The building will be 6 months away. When they move, they're all coming out your way to Footscray. So that was good. So I started there, and on my 17th birthday, they took out apprenticeship with me, so I became apprentice to engineering, turning and fitting, and the next 5 years I did night school at the Footscray Tech. Walking down class over barricades and pushing wheelbarrows aside to get to a class that was fitted and made up to be able to be used, but by the following year, 39, that was all complete, so that was the southern wing, but just added to the old part of the building. We used to meet up in the main in the old part very early in 38. When you start in industry as an apprentice, you sweep the floor, you clean the lavatories, you do the messages. I used to ride out to Carlton on my push bike at 15 shillings a week was the fee. That's $1.50. And they allowed me 2 and 6 extra to use my bike to do the messages around and get their lunches and do all that sort of thing. But when we moved over here to Maidstone after the 6 months, it was and the installation of machinery and whatnot. And of course, a lot of people who lived the other side of town that were employed didn't venture over to Footscray with the change. So consequently then, I was then put onto a machine, and from the education that I had the confidence because I could run a lathe, and it fitted in quite well. As I say, and then in due course, a couple of years down the line, I then went onto the maintenance crew, and that was the best education that I could ever get because that handled everything. You did your own heat treating, you did your own electrical wiring, and certainly things you can't possibly do these days, but we learned everything, and it touched on that on the school, and the night school, of course, covered it, and you were controlled by the apprenticeship commission who were seeing that you were fairly dealt with, and you had to be then allocated to different aspects of the production work according to the regulations of taking on apprenticeships. So it was great. I enjoyed it immensely. I tackled everything really at the fact of from being a machinist onto the maintenance, and then we made car parts and piston rings and so on, and we were experimenting. We needed I shouldn't say this, but Repco were our main big opposition. They brought out a controlled oil ring, which was doing reasonably well on the market, and we couldn't match it. So I, with one of the foremen, excuse me, was elected to work in development of coming up with a new ring that could hit the market and be competition to Repco. And that we did, and after establishing the type of ring that we were trying to do, and we excelled in making it, and it marketed, and it went very well. It went probably better than Repco's, I say that with it. But from then on, I was then set up a department to manufacture mass production, so I was in charge of the mass production at that stage. Then I went into the office work, into planning, production planning, and then I was moved over to the warehouse as an assistant, and that's where I stopped for 15 years, developing into the warehouse manager. When Repco took us over, and then Repco had their own schooling, and one thing, so we did extensive schooling according to the Repco guidelines, which was all very good. I was there till I retired. So really, from 1940 till my retirement age, after 42 years, had the one job in the one place, but did everything. Oh, well, I was also the social secretary for many years, and that's the entertainment side of the staff, which we were very progressive. We did this outings, dances, and everything in the routine, and I was able to convince the management that we needed a new canteen rather than a little room to sit in for our lunches, and after they listened to me and submitted a plan, and they duly endorsed it and built a beautiful big canteen on the spot. So I was canteen manager as well as the others thrown in, and all in all, and I made some great friends. And with being a warehouse manager, you had contacts interstate and overseas in relation to supply and requirements and so forth. So no, I have no regrets. I've had an experience which I cherish very much. Totally different. It used to. Footscray were well renowned for their smells from the abattoirs at South Kensington and all that there. But then, of course, with the development of the high-rise buildings going up all around the place, and the extension of the university, of course, since our days at the complex right along Ballarat Road has been in existence, and of course the operations down at the Whitton Reserve there, at wherever you go now, universities, even we go through up Ballarat Road and into Sunshine. So it's a different complex altogether than our days. I don't. I can't pinpoint it down solely to the tech. Again, I must bring in scouting to a minor degree, because that was a big job in handling the boys and whatnot. And with the moving through, and my life has been taken up with the YMCA work. I was 27 years with the YMCA as not as a member as a youth, but on the administration. And actually, I was from Doug Mills, who used to be a principal of the Tech as a name. I served with him as his assistant, he was the president, and I was the vice president of the board there when through hard times, financial times, building times. Then we started another group from the council, which Doug Mills, we used Doug Mills' boardroom up at the Nicholson Street there for the meetings once a month, and that developed into me taking on the job as chairman of the Footscray Bicentennial Committee, and that led then 2 years later into Footscray's 100 years as a city. I was chairman of that committee, in which we had a major entertainment once a month right through the whole year, which brought a lot of people in. So all in all, I can't claim that the school helped me on that, but it gave me the confidence to be able to do this sort of work. So with the community work and working with the youth and whatnot, they seem fit to grant me their OAMs. Yeah, but we still have a great love for the school, because even now, since our the school days, with the university now and the way they treat us as this class of 38 we've referred to, they're right behind us, you know. They've adopted this sort of thing and making sure that we are recognised as a part of the school or the university groupings. Yeah.